your attention and time today, and for your beautiful sunshine. I came from icy Philadelphia on Wednesday, so I'm so happy to be here with the palm trees and the sunshine. So yes, I'm here from the Cultural Data Project, as Shelley let you know before. It's true that before my tenure with Pew, I was working with the Arts and Business Council of Greater Philadelphia and filling out the data profile for my Grantmakers in Pennsylvania, so I have a very intimate knowledge of the project, and I hope that you will too after we're done with our presentation today. So I like to start with the mission, and I want to share it with you here. The Cultural Data Project's mission is to strengthen the national nonprofit arts and cultural sector by collecting and disseminating comprehensive, high-quality longitudinal data that supports fact-based decision-making in 3 key ways. That leads me well into talking to you about our 3 main constituents. The project views 3 main constituencies. First being arts and cultural organizations. We aim to help these organizations improve their financial management services and their services to their communities. The project also supports researchers, advocates, and policymakers by making it possible for them to tell their story and providing the data for that. Finally, of course, the 3rd main constituency are funders, Grantmakers. We hope that the data collected by our project helps them more effectively plan for and evaluate their individual and collective grant-making activities. So let's talk a little about the history of CDP and how this came to be. We joke in the office and when we do these presentations that CDP was born out of a mutiny. In 2001, there were some very interesting conversations happening in Pennsylvania. On the Grantmaker side, folks like the Pennsylvania State Council on the Arts and the William Penn Foundation, our biggest funders in the state, were having trouble and grumbling, not being able to tell their story. Probably a challenge that while we're all from different sectors, we can all share that challenge to be able to get reliable data together to advocate for our cause and tell our story. We didn't have those resources in Pennsylvania at the time, so Grantmakers were grumbling. In the same way, arts and cultural organizations were having the same trouble. They were feeling very stunted by the need to continually reformat their financial information for grant applications, a million different ways for a million different grant makers. Never getting any return on that, sending that information out into what felt like a black hole, never being able to reevaluate themselves based on that information, and then on top of it, never being counted in advocacy. Always seeing arts be on the chopping block and the first to go when funding was being taken away. So there was a collective sigh of how can we agree to agree in this way. And the ball ended up in the court of the funders and the grant makers, and it took about 3 years, these grant makers in Pennsylvania, to create the Cultural Data Project. You see a few stats here on the screen about the timeline, how it came to be, and the initial investment. It originally launched in Pennsylvania in 2004, so that was 3 years of creating the data profile before it launched. And we were perfectly happy to be just that, the Pennsylvania Cultural Data Project at the time. But it quickly spread like wildfire. So let's take a look at the national map. A couple of years into a very successful project, our neighbors to the south, Maryland, came knocking and said, we need an at-cost model. We have these needs. We need to do the same thing. So quickly, the project launched in Maryland, and you see the expansion here. The next state to come on board was California. Of course, that was critical, a large state in a different sector of the country. We're currently operating in 11 states and the District of Columbia, so that's 12 cultural data projects operating currently. And we have Minnesota teed up to launch its cultural data project in June of this year. So from humble beginnings to almost a national arts and cultural sector. And that truly is our goal, to have as many states participating as possible so that we can have reliable longitudinal data to talk about the impact of the sector in each region, in each state, and across the country as well. So let's talk about who. It is continually growing. This project continually grows. You can see here there are nearly 12,000 participating organizations. So of those 12 cultural data projects, there are 12,000 organizations represented with their data, more than 200 participating funders. And the scope of partners, you can see the list here, private and public funders, community foundations, and corporate funders, all different types, come together to make this project happen. In each state, a task force is formed at the commencement of the project. In Arizona, we have support from our wonderful partners, the Piper Trust, Flynn Foundation, the Arizona Commission on the Arts, Tucson Pima Arts Council, Flagstaff Cultural Partners, Arizona Community Foundation, have all come together to make this possible. And it's the same format in each state. Funders, advocacy groups, all come together to bring the Cultural Data Project to the community. Who can participate? So on one side, we've now talked about who makes this project happen, the funders and the advocates. But really the project is put together for arts and cultural organizations. And I know for most folks, your mind goes right to that traditional, typical performing arts grantee, and it's actually so much more than that for the Cultural Data Project. We define culture in the broadest sense of the word. So the data being collected from those 12,000 organizations currently is not only your opera and your theater and your dance, but arboreta, zoos, libraries, historic houses, the arts program in a university, the arts program at a non-arts mission-based organization. Any activity in the cultural sector is what we aim to capture in the Cultural Data Project. You can see that 56% of our users have budgets of less than $250,000. So we also capture information from those large multi-million-dollar behemoth arts and cultural organizations, way down to those wee tiny little $5,000 a year festivals that are volunteer run. So the data profile, which we'll talk about in a moment, really is set up to collect a broad range of data from a broad range of organizations. And this just gives you a look at the different types of organizations whose data you can find in the data profiles. Here's a look at what. So now we've talked about who puts their data in, what kind of data are we collecting? The data profile starts by collecting organizational data. So we capture an organization's mission statement and their general stats, where they are and who they are, legislative district, that type of thing. And then we move on to collecting financial data. So we start collecting revenue, and that is broken out, earned and contributed revenue over restriction categories. The data profile was built to follow best practices for nonprofit accounting, so it's against GAAP and FASB rules. We also collect information on organizational expenses. So that's broken out by functional expense category. We collect specific information on expenses where salary and fringe comes into play, so that we can later talk about the workforce of the arts and cultural sector. Additionally, we collect information on balance sheet if that's available for an organization, and additionally their investments and loans. So really, by the time an organization is finished with those sections, we get a really good look at their financial picture. Finally, the final section of the data profile collects non-financial data. The other side of the numbers story for a cultural organization is really, who are you serving? So we're collecting information on their program activities, attendance, pricing, contributors, and staff and non-staff statistics. So we have a nice balance. We collect that information on what their costs are around salaries, and we're also collecting information on their workforce, FTEs. So we capture how many volunteers, how many part-time employees, all of those categories in staffing. You have a question?
Yeah, can I ask you a question?
I guess, sure, of course. According to me.
Under financial data revenues, do you break it down by sources? How much is from government sector, private sector, corporate, individuals?
Indeed, we do actually, yes. There are lines for each, so board, individual, corporate, foundation. And government, interestingly enough, is broken down in a little more detail. You can imagine that when an advocate comes to us for data, they really want to hear about government support of the arts, right? It's a no-brainer. So we ask organizations to give us a little more data there. They actually list each government supporter, and it's broken down city, county, federal, and state. So we get the name of the granting organization, how much they've granted each year. So we get a lot of detail there.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking that. So that's the type of data you find in the data profile. These are just some things to keep in mind. Of course, when you're collecting this data, it's important for you to know that it is self-reported. So the organization, we train organizations on reporting this data, and we encourage them to use their audit or review or their board-approved year-end financial statements. So the data being collected is historic. We're not asking organizations to go through the exercise of projecting, which many of us know are generally a shot in the dark anyway. As a former arts administrator, as a general manager at a theater company, it was a guess, projecting for a grant application. I mean, you just don't ever really truly know. So the data we're collecting is historic. So once an organization has their final audit in their hand, not that watermark draft audit, the final, then you go ahead and enter your data. So that we make sure that those totals are true totals. The system also does an automated error check. So once an organization has entered their data, there's an automated system that goes ahead and checks all that math, cross-checks all those numbers to make sure that the itemized revenue and expenses tie out with the audit verification sheet and the bottom line totals on the balance sheet, so that we make sure that the data that we're passing along to the community and to the grant makers is as accurate as it can be. There's also an offline data review. There are actually 2 reviews where a human being from our help desk actually goes through each data profile to make sure that there's not any anomalous data. We do a lot of outreach to organizations to say, hey, we see this weird thing. Can we talk about it? And we generally learn a lot about how they're reporting and help them think through their financial and programmatic reporting. We also have this fabulous feature. I think it's the most important part is the help desk. There's a staff that's well-trained, financial consultants are on board to help organizations understand and ask any questions that they might have about how to report their activity. So now that we've talked about sort of the history and the making and what the project is, let's take a walk through this flow chart so that you can understand how it comes to be. And really, the whole process begins with arts and cultural organizations entering their data into the data profile. Here's a snapshot of section 3, which is the revenue section. You can see, as I mentioned, we're breaking out revenue over restriction categories. What you're seeing here are line items under earned revenue. If you were able to scroll down the page, you would see contributed revenue as well. There's also built-in learning here. This column of orange question marks, those are line instructions. In that 3-year period where this data project was being created, those funders were writing these definitions, helping organizations understand what was being asked of them, so that you know when you're getting data from CDP that it's apples to apples data. People are speaking the same language. And so funders and organizations alike can see these line instructions and understand what they're reporting and what they're seeing. So after an organization has entered their data and gone through the error check, the organization has access to some amazing, robust reporting capabilities. Of course, often organizations are resource strapped. They can't take their data and make it into something for themselves. So CDP offers 77 different report types. There's an annual report that an organization can create in just 3 clicks. It's a 2-page, professionally laid out with charts and graphs. It's customizable. They can add text, so they can really help someone understand the context of their numbers. Additionally, they can run different trend and comparison reports. So you can see this is an example of a personnel expense. It's personnel expense as a % of total expenses. And it's a comparison report. So you can see your organization's breakdown in the pie chart to the far your left, and then a comparison group as well. So you can benchmark yourself as an organization and see how you're measuring up to organizations like you, maybe in your state or in different parts of the country that are participating. Additionally, you can see there are options to look at components of net assets and your return on investment for fundraising expenses. There's also a great report that shows ROI on marketing as well. So very robust capability for strategic planning and benchmarking for organizations that are participating.
Lora, talk a little bit about what the comparison group is.
Oh, sure.
How you determine who you're comparing yourself to.
Absolutely. So you have a lot of options there as an organization. The data throughout the database is available to you. It's masked. Of course, we have an eye on privacy. We want to make sure that organizations feel safe putting their data in. So as an organization, once I've put in my data profile, I can build a comparison group based on many different categories. Disciplines, say I'm a dance organization and I want to compare to other dance organizations. I'm interested in growing. I have a budget size of $100,000 and I want to grow to $250,000. What does that look like? So I can build my comparison group based on budget size, based on staff size, organizational age, or maybe organizations that are undergoing a capital campaign. Many different options in making that comparison group that you want to compare yourself to. So lots of options there. Does that help?
So not only within Arizona, but across the country, any other state that is using this this system.
Exactly. So we can keep going with that Phoenix, Philadelphia comparison, right? If you're interested in what other organizations are like in a city that's like yours, you can go ahead and build that comparison. As long as there are 3 groups or more in the comparison criteria that you've built, you can see average and median for that group. That's how that works. Does that help?
Thank you.
Great. Additionally, after an organization has entered their data, they can use that data in grant applications to grant makers who are participating in CDP. So I'll show you a couple different examples of funder reports. We call these funder reports. And these are the reports that organizations like the Flynn Foundation and the Piper Trust are receiving from their applicants. That budget, organizational budget form that's traditional in a grant application is now taken away. And the data entry process into the data profile is all an organization has to do. So the more funders that participate in the state, the better it is for the arts and cultural sector. That's one set of data entry and many different grant makers that can participate and receive that data, and it's just 2 or 3 clicks for an organization. And there's
not to be competitive with Philadelphia, but Philadelphia has 22 funders who use this system. Just think about the ease that that provides for the applicants, so they don't have to reformat their information.
Yeah.
And we have about 10 funders now that are using it. We want to get better than Philadelphia.
And we can. And we can. We definitely can do it. I mean, the interest is here. And I can tell you as a former user that CDP became part of my financial activity annually. Do you know, I would go through the process with the audit. Once I got the final from the auditor, I would scan it, email it to the financial consultant, make an appointment, and we'd talk on the phone. And she'd help me understand what I was seeing. I learned so much. I mean, I have a theater degree. I haven't taken a math class since I was 19, you know. I needed help, and she really helped me understand what it all meant and helped me report it. So it just became part of my regular activity financially. So that's a look at the different types of reports. Some of our funders have just a 2-page quick revenue and expense summary. The Massachusetts Cultural Council has a 24-page report with financial health ratios and the whole 9 yards. So most are in between, around a 5 to 6-page report, but anything's possible with CDP data. So that's the benefit for arts and cultural organizations. Let's talk a little about grant makers. On top of getting that really nice-looking professional report, and it's important for me to mention to you too that for arts and cultural organizations, this evens the playing field for them. So this tiny little small staffed organization that's up against this giant museum competing for the same money doesn't have to worry about their ability to format their financial report. Everybody submits the exact same thing. So everybody looks, the playing field looks even. It's very important for the sector. I can imagine you can all agree there. So that's another benefit for the cultural sector as well. CDP also provides data sets to grant makers so that they can have informed decision making as well. The James Irvine Foundation, one of our partners in California, used CDP data to do an applicant financial health assessment. This is masked, of course, so that we can share it, but these are the type of applications you can see with the data. Cuyahoga County in Ohio used their CDP data to learn that even over the economic downturn, their grantees were actually offering 25% more programming as a result of their grant making. So they could really tell their own story. In September, we launched Grantmakers CDP, which is an online portal that provides hands-on access to electronic data for grant makers. So Shelley and Carol have both been through a training to learn how they can run those same comparison and trend reports on their applicants and look at how their applicants stack up against other CDP organizations across the country. Very robust system that I'm super excited about. Additionally, let's talk about another one of those constituent groups, the researchers. Of course, this is just a treasure chest for them to get data on the cultural sector. This report might be familiar to some of you, Getting Beyond Break Even. This was put out by TDC probably about 2 years ago, and it was commissioned by William Penn Foundation and Pew to talk about capitalization in the arts and cultural sector. This report actually spawned a sector-wide, nationwide conversation about capitalization and why it's important for the sector. It really changed the way grant makers were looking at their activities in a lot of ways. Additionally, this is one of our newest reports using CDP data, put out by Dance NYC, which is a dance advocacy group in New York. They used their dance data to learn that corporate funding was almost obsolete for the dance community in New York. Since this report has come out, There have been a series of town hall meetings so the grantmakers can come together and talk to the dance community and really understand the impact and move forward to make some changes. So grantmakers and researchers are really benefiting from the data. Finally, let's take a look at some of the advocacy pieces. Some of you may be familiar with the portfolio report. We have it in person here that we can pass around. The Greater Philadelphia Cultural Alliance is an advocacy group in Philadelphia. They use CDP data to talk about the impact of the sector. The first portfolio came out in 2006. It was the first time that we could quantify our workforce and talk about the fact that there were 12,500 arts and cultural employees. It was the second largest employer in the sector, or in the region, and we didn't know it before. So we were really able to tell that story using CDP data. Once that report came out, board members of cultural organizations were like, we need to be counted here, and the numbers just exploded. Since then, they've put out 2 other reports. The one that's circulating is the 2011, that's the 3rd edition. It's a big glossy report, and it really talks about the trends over the last years in the data. But it's important to know that those research pieces using CDP data don't have to be big and glossy and expensive. We've seen a lot of impact with some smaller pieces. Montgomery County, Maryland used their CDP data to create this postcard called Let's Start with $1. So you can see here, in FY08, $1 invested by Montgomery County in the arts and humanities was matched by all those contributions, pumping $13.33 back into the local economy from outside sources. So this CDP data is really empowering folks to be able to tell their story and talk about why arts and culture should be on the table and part of the conversation when you're talking about the economy in a region. Additionally, we have this great piece from Pennsylvania that was a mail-in to legislature. So you can see if Pennsylvania could attract an industry that had all these great attributes, you flip it over and it says it does, it's arts and culture. And you sign it and mail it back. So both of these pieces were instrumental in securing and keeping funding in both of these places. So something that we can have too in Arizona as soon as we have our CDP data. And there's my contact info if anyone wants to hear more.